And they're going to really piss off some dealerships because I can tell you, these guys need cars to sell. In this video, I'm going to be discussing General Motors' Tesla killer and the abrupt lane change that they've made in their transition to electric vehicles. And who's being left behind in all of this as Mary leads.
Mary, I can remember talking to you way back in January about the need for America to lead in electric vehicles. And I can remember your dramatic announcement that by 2035, GM would be 100% electric. You changed the whole story, Mary, wherever you are. There you are. You did, Mary. You electrified the entire automobile industry. I'm serious. You led, and it mattered.
I'm Josh West, and this is Josh West 24/7. I'm a 15-year veteran of Legacy Automotive and a top performer in the field, but now I see that Legacy Automotive has completely lost their way, and I'm here to provide clarity and perspective from my experience of 15 years in Legacy Automotive. So let's take a look at General Motors. When the Bolt was released, the headlines were everywhere. This is the Tesla killer. Tesla doesn't stand a chance. The Model 3 is absolutely doomed. It's never going to go anywhere. Anybody that wants an electric car, an affordable electric car, they're going to buy the Chevy Bolt. Bolt beat them to the market and all that sort of thing. And the headlines were just endless for years. And you can go back and look at them, just Google it, and you'll find out. And they look pretty ridiculous now. But at the time, man, people thought Tesla was just going down, and they weren't going to survive, and GM was just going to crush them. And well, obviously that's not the case because the Bolt has just been discontinued and the Tesla Model 3 is selling in higher volumes than it ever has before. What's interesting though is that last year, the Chevy Bolt had its best year ever, and it was tracking fantastic sales despite a recent stop sale because of some battery fires. And the question is, well, why did Mary Barra, the CEO of General Motors, why did she decide to cancel General Motors' most affordable and highest volume electric vehicle, especially when electric vehicles are in higher demand than ever in the history of mankind? That's a great question. The first issue I see with the Bolt is pricing. Tesla continues to lower prices on their Model 3 and Model Y as they find new efficiencies, as they lower the costs of production, as they find cheaper resources for materials and building products and find new efficiencies in the way that they build the vehicles. Things like gigacasting and things like integrated battery packs and LFP batteries or using iron in the batteries versus high nickel, which is considerably more expensive. And other innovations that they find, they take these savings and they pass it along to customers. Whereas GM just doesn't have the volume, they don't have the technology, they don't have the engineering to do anything like that. The other big problem is that the Bolt is just simply not upgradable. If you hop into one of these vehicles, now imagine you're back in 2016 or 2017, in the early days, you're like, oh, this is kind of cool, it's interesting, very nice colorful screen, good size, and at first glance, before you turn the vehicle on, it looks pretty good. And we actually sold quite a few Bolts back when I was running a used electric vehicle department. And I can tell you this, that the Bolt customer was quite a bit different than the Model 3 customer. The Bolt customer was strictly on price. And the benefit was that I was able to buy them at auction because they were depreciated quite heavily. And most people didn't really know much about them. And so we were able to get them at a good price and turn them over pretty quickly. Sometimes they did sit if you got to be really careful that you didn't pay too much for them. But the Teslas, on the other hand, man, those things would just turn over like water, no problem at all. They were actually a pretty easy sale. And during the time, what's funny with the Teslas as compared to the Bolt is that, they'd be sitting at the dealership and the Bolt would be exactly the same car, 3, 4, 5 weeks later. Well, the Tesla, from when I would purchase it at the auction.
So guys, we're gonna sneak you inside. Right inside where all the bidding's happening, where all the buying's happening. You're not gonna be able to hear me, it's gonna be crazy. Check it out.
6, 7, 5, 6, 6, 6, 7 minutes, 6 there guys, 7 minutes, 1 minute, 6, 7, 15, 7, now 8, 15, 7, now 8, there guys, 8, 8, 9, 15, 9, 15, 9, 59, now 6, 6, another 6, 59, now 6, 5, 6, 1, 1.
It would get sold and make it to market and that sort of thing. It had already had a couple of software updates. It could have had several new features. We were actually having to go in I remember this vividly. I would actually have to go into the vehicle descriptions on Auto Trader and other places that we were advertising cars, and then sit there and update the descriptions with the new features that the Tesla just downloaded overnight. And when we came into work the next day, it's like, oh, you have dog mode. Oh, you have this. Oh, you have that. And so it was a little bit extra work, but it made it easier to sell that used Tesla because it all of a sudden had these new features. Well, contrast that to the Bolt. And the Bolt is exactly the same vehicle, even though it sat on your dealer lot for another month, 2 or 3, it never was updated over time. And so that's one of the reasons I believe that GM has kind of fallen apart and fallen behind with the Chevy Bolt, is that it just simply was not upgradable, and it's really no different than it was back in late 2016. And so now with Tesla, you have a vehicle that is continually increasing in features and software and capability. But at the same time, Tesla's doing their best to bring the prices down, to make the vehicle more affordable, to bring more value to the customer. So now the customer's getting more features and paying a less price with Tesla. Well, look at General Motors, and what are they doing? The Bolt is still not upgradable. There's still no over-the-air software updates. There's still no improvements to this vehicle. It's stagnant, and it's not improving, and it's quite outdated. Yet they still sell. Well, sure, because Tesla can't sell every single EV out there. I mean, there are certain people out there that are going to go to a General Motors dealership, or they've been dealing with that General Motors dealership, or maybe they don't know about Tesla, or maybe they're apprehensive about Tesla, or whatever the case may be. Maybe they just don't know. The reality is that the Bolt was selling, but not to the extent that it was very profitable for GM. And they could see very clearly that with the advent of these other technologies and this other competition that they're experiencing from Tesla through the dropping prices, that the future wasn't very rosy for the Chevy Bolt. Some of the other reasons I believe that the Bolt was canceled is that they just came through a huge spell where the Bolt had a massive recall on it due to battery fires. You see, General Motors uses an archaic battery design, a pouch cell battery. Now, there's 2 main ways that EV manufacturers will build a car and build a battery pack. One will use pouch cells, and the other will use cylindrical cells. Now, cylindrical cells are very familiar. They look like your traditional, AA, D, C batteries that you'd see in the store, whereas a pouch cell kind of reminds me of like a little Ziploc bag type of thing of leftovers, where they put in your anode, cathode, and all that good stuff in there and create this slim, literally a pouch design. The problem with that is you run into issues with thermal management, and they're just not that robust, and the ability to control the climate, control and manage that battery with thermals becomes much more difficult with pouch cells, although pouches generally are much cheaper to manufacture. So there's kind of a trade-off. But the reality is that when you run into some of these problems later on, like fires and things like that, is it really worth it to stick with those pouches? Probably not. And now GM has actually recently announced that with their new Ultium platform, they have switched. They originally were going to launch this new Ultium platform with pouch cells, and now they've switched over to going with cylindrical cells. So the word's getting out. They're realizing that the design is absolutely imperative right out of the gate so that you don't run into all these other problems down the road. If you want to check out some great videos with deep insight into battery cells and battery cell technology, check out Monroe Live, and I'll put a link for them down in the description below. So with these battery fires, there was actually a 10-month stop sale where dealerships could not even sell the inventory that they had. It was frozen, it was shut down, so no matter if there was demand, they couldn't move it. So very, very frustrating on the dealership side to have these vehicles just sitting there rotting away on their lots. And that really put a monkey wrench into GM's appeal with this vehicle to the market, because over that time it really just developed kind of a bad name, synonymous with these battery fires and these very public recalls, this stop sale where you just drive by a GM store and you see 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of these things just sitting there for months and months and months. And that basically contributed to the negative sentiment regarding the Bolt as well, which again began to really hurt sales and began to really hurt the overall branding. And taking a closer look at what's going on here, it seems to me like General Motors really doesn't want to compete in the cheap EV space. It seems like they tried and they've failed. It really hasn't worked out well for them. And now, from what I can see, I mean, I actually covered it in my auto show video, but I went to the General Motors booth there at this huge auto show. It was the biggest auto show in Canada. And GM turned out, man, they had EVs there. They sure did. They had the Blazer EV. They had the Equinox EV. They had the new Silverado EV. Checked out the Denali pickup truck EV, the Hummer pickup truck and Hummer SUV, both electric. And so they do have electric vehicles along with the Cadillac Lyriq, I'll mention as well. So they do have EVs coming out and in production and that sort of thing, but there's nothing affordable. So what are my thoughts on this overall situation of General Motors completely canceling the Bolt? Well, I can tell you right off the top of my head, my thoughts go out to the dealerships. I can tell you as a salesperson, when you lose a vehicle, like a complete market segment, like you can't even you don't even have anything to sell. Like I'm stumbling over my words here, but like it's so frustrating when you're sitting at that desk and you get a call from a client saying, yeah, I'm looking for such and such. I remember working in the Stellantis world when we got rid of our compact sedan, the Dodge Dart, and they canceled it, and we would have calls for it, and it was like, I have nothing to sell you. I mean, I can try and sell you something used, and you do your best, but the reality is they would just hop, skip down the road and go buy something else. And so I feel for these guys because they were one of the only ones in Legacy Auto that had a decently affordable electric vehicle. And so perhaps they had customers that were Uber drivers or delivery guys or people that just wanted an electric vehicle that lived in the community or what have you. And the customers would call in and say, yeah, I'm just looking for an electric car. I don't have $100,000 to spend. What do you have? Well, now they have nothing. Which is tough place to be in. I mean, no matter what they do, guaranteed lost that sale. So that's a tough place to be in, very disheartening. Yes, it's not a huge high volume on a per store basis. I get that. But it's also a real cut to morale when you lose that type of a vehicle, when they chop a market segment right out of your product offering. It doesn't feel good at the dealership level. So you got a morale issue at the dealership level. Obviously, lost revenue, lost profits, all of that sort of thing. So that's not going to be pretty. The fact of the matter is that if GM doesn't have something really hot and really sharp to replace that Bolt with, they're going to really cripple themselves and they're going to really piss off some dealerships, because I can tell you, these guys need cars to sell because they're coming up against Tesla a lot more than you think. And they only really get one crack at go round at it, because when that customer calls in, by the time they hang up the phone from that GM dealership, they're already on their phone ordering their Tesla when they get the bad news that the Bolt is no longer available. Or they're contacting Hyundai to take a look at the Ioniq 5, or they're calling VinFast or whoever else that they want to take a look at. The bottom line is that Chevy dealer did not get the deal because they don't have anything to sell them. So I do feel bad for those guys. GM is going down a bad road with these only focusing on these high-end EVs. And I get it, they have a profit problem. But at the same time, if you alienate an entire market segment, that's not going to prove to be good for your business long term. Look at the price points on these vehicles. I mean, the Lyriq is not cheap. That Blazer EV, it's going to be a little cheaper than the Lyriq, but marginally cheaper. The other thing is, you look at these trucks, like these Denali, we're coming out with Denali EVs, 100,000 plus. We're looking at these Hummers, multi-$100,000 plus. The Celestiq Cadillac, this giant low production Cadillac, like we're chasing that $300,000-$400,000 car. Like, where are we going here? You know, we're talking about a very small portion of the population that can afford these vehicles. And yet the one vehicle from General Motors that a normal person could afford has just been deleted. So I hope GM's got something great up their sleeve, because right now it's looking more like Mary misled. So I don't know. We'll leave that with you. We've got more thoughts, more perspective coming up. I got some hot new videos coming your way. So stick with me. We'll see you in the next video.